When you're in Lightroom Classic trying to edit, you have two different types of editing that can go on. You've got global adjustments, which your basic panel and all the panels below there deal with. That's editing the entirety of the image. Or you have local adjustments, like your cropping tool, your healing brush, or what we'll be dealing with today on the Lightroom Whisperer, your masking tools. There's quite a few of them, so I'm going to actually break this into two separate episodes, and we get a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. Before we get started though, did you know that in real life you and I could actually work together to improve your photography? Whether that be remotely from the comfort of your own living room, joining me around the world at any of the amazing destinations that I lead small group workshops, or even creating your own one-on-one like we're doing here. Light Source Journeys, helping illuminate your photographic journey. For more information, check out the description below. Now let's get to it. Today I'm going to take you through a few of the more common masking tools that people would end up using. And we're going to start right with one that deals with people. So to start with masking, I'm going to go into my local adjustments. That's these ones on the top bar up here. And this last one, when you click it, is going to open up the mask options. Now here we've got three people in here, and I could try to click subject, and it would try to identify them as the subject. But if I hold on a second, look down below, it has now identified all of the people within this image. This doesn't exactly work all of the time, but it's amazing how well it does work most of the time. If you have a large group of people and maybe somebody's a little bit darker than the other one in there and you need to bring them up a bit, I can now go in and I can identify individually which one of these people I want to work with, or the combination of more than one, or using all people. Now in this instance, let's just say it's the middle boy we want to go in effect. Once I click that, it's going to actually give me more options. If I hold on a second, it's now going to say, do you want to use the facial skin, the body skin, the eyebrows, the eye sclera, which is the white part of the eyes, the iris and pupil, the lips, the teeth, the hair, or the clothes. You can literally identify any of those and make an individual mask for each. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose his facial skin and now say create mask. Now it's going to just identify that area, which you can see is yellow right now over here. In yours, it's probably going to be pink. That's what it defaults to. You can actually go, if the color is hard to see or identify against what you're trying to make your mask in, and change that by clicking on this little box here. You see mine currently is the yellow, the same kind of color his face is. And if I go and I click that, I can choose a different color that might stand out more against that background. So in this case, I think that pink works pretty well. The higher up this color chart you go, the more saturated that's going to be. So I usually try to get pretty high on the saturation scale for this. And then a color that's kind of on the opposite side of the color spectrum, so it really stands out. Now, this might be something that you have to change picture to picture because it might get hidden. Let's say I have a pink car in a shot. I'm not going to be able to see this one. I might have to make it blue. So now that I've chosen one that stands out, I'm going to just hit the little X. It's going to remember that. And when I start to make adjustments, this overlay will disappear on its own so I can start to see exactly what that adjustment does. Double click there to get rid of that. But in this case, there's also another little box here that says show overlay. And if I click that, that'll let me see that or take away that overlay if it's too distracting for me overall. Now it doesn't bother me at all, so I'm going to leave that show overlay on there. And it's showing us right now that we have mask 1. That's the person 2, our second person, and it's his facial skin that it's identified. Now if I want to rename mask 1, because I might have more masks and I might kind of not remember which is which, I can go and click on these three little dots and I can say rename, and I can say, in this case, center person, just to make sure that I've got an idea of who is exactly in that one. And now it's showing me what it's identified. Now in this case, let's say I want to just bring his skin tone down a little bit, maybe the highlights a little bit, and maybe adjust the color a tiny bit. All of these panels are kind of mirroring the panels we'd have in our basic adjustments. As you look down here, I've got my point color, my curve, effects, and detail. A few things will move around. Like when you're in your basic panel for your global adjustments, you'll see things like clarity and dehaze and texture along with your tone, your exposure, and things like that. Here they actually hide it underneath effects, which is where your vignette normally is in your basic panel. So in this case, I don't really need that specific one. to be identified in his face. And if I do go and, let's say, bring a little of the yellow out of there, just kind of dim it down a bit. And then I want to go to the third boy on here. I can then say create new mask. This is going to keep that first mask. And then I can say, let's in this case say select people again. I'm going to go to our third person. And in this case, I want his clothing to be what I'm selecting. And I'm going to say create mask. And here's our second mask now up here. Because we renamed the other one, this one's now known as mask 1. Had we not renamed that, it would have remained mask 1 and this would have been mask 2. I'm going to go and I'm going to rename this one now, just because it's going to help me keep things a little bit more even. And I'm going to say third boy. Okay, and in this case, let's say we want to go and we want to make his clothing a totally different color. I'm going to go to red over here. So we can play a little bit with that and do exactly what we want. And let's see, we want to darken it a little bit and bring up the highlights a little bit and the whites a little bit. Just that specific area is being identified within there. Now we're going to go and delete this mask because that's not what I actually want. So I'm going to go in that same 3 little dots and go down to delete third boy, and that's going to get rid of just his mask. We still have the other one here. Now let's go to a different picture that gets us into a different masking type. We're going to go to this mountain lion, which overall looks like a pretty good shot. What we're using masks for generally is to subtly shape light within the image to draw the viewer's eye to bring it to the subject exactly where we want. So in this case, I can actually go in, I can choose subject, and it's going to look and identify what the subject is. Now in this case, I just want to go in and maybe warm up her coat a little bit and give her a little bit more yellow. Now that's done pretty good to already start to draw my eye and separate her out a little bit more, but oftentimes we'll use a vignette in a shot to kind of pull your eye somewhere. If I was to just go to my normal panel and I would go to vignette, post-crop vignette, let's actually do that here. It's going to take it and really vignette around the center point of the image, and here our subject is really off-center. We want to draw the eye more to her, not to the center of this image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reset my post-crop vignette. I'm going to get my mask again. If I click back on mask 1, it'll reopen her mask. Now that's her. Remember, I don't necessarily want to work on that one, so I'm going to create another mask. And in this case, I want that kind of oval shape, still the vignette's going to have. But I want it off-center, so I'm going to go to our radial gradient. The radial gradient is going to allow me to create a circular or oval shape. If I click where I want the center of it to be, hold down and drag, outward's going to go just kind of flat. Up will just go flat the other way. If you go diagonal, you can kind of draw out into the shape that you want. That's going to now allow me to create a vignette right around her. Now the problem is this is her that I'm affecting. So if I go and I try to darken this right now, that's not going to look great, and it's clearly, if I brighten it, not going to really work. I want to darken the exterior around her because I liked her exposure. So if I go and I click my 3 little dots, I can go to invert mask 2. That's going to now take it to the rest of the shot. It's allowing me to have her stay the way she is, and I can now darken ever so subtly that external area, and it's drawing your eye directly to her now. Now I've got 2 masks up here. If I want to see what it looked like before I used either of these masks, up on top there's a little eye. And if I push and hold down on my mouse or my touchpad, we can see the before masks and after masks. Now individually we've got 2 masks. What if we want to separate it out and see what happened before we did our vignette or before we yellowed up her coat a little bit? Each one of these, when we hover over that individual mask, will have the eye next to it, and that's going to just get rid of that individual adjustment. So I can see this looks pretty natural still. So much so, I could actually probably bring up a little more for my exposure on my image. And that looks pretty good. So before our masking, if we get rid of all of it, the image looks pretty good. After those little 2 subtle adjustments that we made, now your eye is drawn right to her. You see her immediately, and she's a lot more presence there. So one more thing I might want to do though, you can see her coat has a lot of detail on it. I'm going to go back into mask 1 by clicking on that one, and I'm going to go to effects. I'm going to use clarity and texture now, just a little bit of each of them to bring out some more of the fur on her coat. Now, same thing, I don't want to go too heavy with this. I think that looks pretty good. But let's say now we want to see what that effect had, but without taking away the kind of more yellow tone that we gave her coat. If we look next to effects, even within this adjustment panel, we now have another eye. We can click and see what just that one did without removing that warm tone that we gave her fur. And you can see it's now more subtly popping all of that little texture within her fur. Now, personally, I really like this shot. I think this one's done. If you were with us last episode, the image that we were working with was actually one up in Norway. This is on a workshop that I run usually in October because we have the best luck of hitting northern lights about then. And this shot, we just used the basic panel to edit. We also talked about the histogram a bit. So if you missed that episode, I'll put a link to in the description down below. As for now, though, let's go through and I'm going to show you how to take this to the next step. I want to bring down a little more of the sky. I maybe want to balance one side of the image a bit more to the other. And I might even want to draw your eye a little bit more to these houses over here. So let's go in and we're going to play with our masks and see exactly what we can do for this. So by opening up our mask, we have a sky mask, and this is very good actually at identifying the sky itself. So I think that actually looks pretty good. It does feather or blend a little bit over the mountains here, which does give it a little more natural of a look. You could, though, go in, if that wasn't something that looked natural the way the light was falling, and you can actually, when you click on your mask, subtract from a specific mask. So I'm going to subtract by using a brush now. And I'm going to go in and remove it from that area over the mountains. My flow and my density here are affecting how much I can actually pull from here. So I'm going to turn these up to 100. Yours probably will be if you've never touched them before. And this is going to now allow me to remove from that specific area. But you can see by doing so, I'm actually getting some of the sky out of there too. And I don't want to get that sky out. I'm going to go back and before I did that removal, I'm going to go ahead and click Auto Mask. Auto Mask is going to try to identify the sky and the mountains, the subject that I'm trying to remove it from, and try to not remove it from the sky now. And it's doing that by, you see that little minus? If I keep that on the subject where I want that to be removed, it's going to try to use that as its subject tone. So when I keep that minus over here and start pulling away, now you can see even though my circle is overlapping in the sky, it's only removing it from the mountain itself. Now I'm going to leave a little feathering over here. And I've removed it here. So if we make an adjustment, you can see if one maybe has a little more natural of a look than the other. So let's pull just the exposure down so we can see here. And I like the blended one a little more. You see how this feathering still looks pretty natural, where this one almost has a harsh kind of look to that edge there. So I don't really want that in my eraser. I'm going to go and I'm going to delete brush 1. That gets rid of that subtraction brush that I used. Now, the sky, I obviously don't want that dark. I'm going to reset it. And I just want to kind of maybe bring down the highlights a little bit. I want to maybe bring a little more blue into it. That's going to help give some perceptual saturation. What that means is without really increasing the saturation, because there's yellow tones and red tones down here, blue being kind of on the opposite end of the color spectrum, if we add a little more of that to the sky, that's going to make the other end look like it's popping a little more because of that separation of those two color ranges. Let's see here. Yeah, it's still not looking too unnatural. I might bring up the saturation a little more. Oof, by doing that actually, maybe a little less blue. There we go. Maybe a little bit of magenta to counteract that. And I think that's looking pretty natural. Now, that's just the sky itself. If you notice though, the sky, I'm going to just shrink this by hitting these two little arrows here so we can see the entirety of the picture. The sky is also kind of gradiated. We've got a darker tone on one side over here with the clouds and where the buildings are, and then the reflection of the brighter sky where there's no clouds into the water is a lot brighter. There's another filter we can use. I'm going to open this and create a new mask and use the linear gradient. The linear gradient, if you've ever shot in like a landscape shot out in the wild, out in nature, you might have used a graduated neutral density filter. These are half gray and half clear, and you're taking that gray part and putting it over the brighter part of the image to help balance it. This is that same kind of principle. I'm going to come in from the side here because I want this brighter side of the image to have more density, more of that filter over it. And then as we move across, we're going to see that start to fade. The more I pull this linear gradient, the longer it goes, the more that blending occurs. So you can see this is all blended between the left to right over here. If I have this as a very small one, it's a harder line. You can actually see that delineation much more. Just to kind of exacerbate that, just for example, we're going to go and I'll just bring the exposure all the way down, and you can really see that hard delineated line. If I go and I grab my little edge here, I can pull that out, and you can see now that blending, that feathering occurring a lot more. Now, I clearly don't want it that dark, but I do want it fairly well blended. If you look at the light here, you can see it blending and getting from light to dark fairly gradually. So I want to try to simulate that. I don't want it over here though. This is my center point. So if I grab this little square, push and hold on it, I can now move this to the area that I want. And I do want it pretty much on the brightest part of the sky, on the brightest part of the water, and then I want that blending, that feathering to be what's giving my natural light fade into the land. This doesn't exactly match the angle it needs to be though. There's a couple ways you can change that. If you start at that center point and you move down the line, you'll see a curved arrow come up, and that's going to allow you to move the angle of it. If you start really close to that though, little movements move very quickly. It can be really hard to get it where you want. The further down the line you go, the more subtle those movements are. So now I can really easily match where I want that to fall. The other way you can do that is the little dot at the end here will give you that same ability, but that can also have a little bit more rapid of movement and a little harder to actually get right. I'm going to get this just about where I want it. And now this part of the image will have no effect from the mask. This will be the part with maximum effect, and this is going to blend those two sides together, hopefully naturally. So I'm going to now go and I'm going to bring my highlights down a little bit. I'm going to bring down the exposure a tiny bit. I don't want to get too muddy though. If you remember when we were in the basic panel, I brought up the whites to counteract that and get some of the pop back, and now I have a little more natural of a look again. Let's go and see what it was like before and after that filter. Subtle, but now we have more of a balance left to right. Now another thing that is going to draw the eye, just like we were talking about using that vignette but off center for the lion, is using that brush if I want to pull some more detail or more eye into these buildings down here. So we're going to go and I'm going to create another mask, and I'm going to use a brush mask now. The brush, we've got our auto mask like we had before, where it can actually try to find a line. And I don't necessarily want to have that on right now because it's going to be hard to really get an even line because it's going to see all these little details in the roof or the buildings or the foreground and not really know what you're trying to apply that mask to. So with that off, I'm actually going to turn my flow and my density down. Flow and density, think of this kind of like if you've ever seen like an airbrush paint. The flow is the amount of air versus paint. So if I have this at 100, and I'm just going to make this a very easy one to see here, so I'm going to take the feathering and go all the way down. There's no blending. I'm going to go to our exposure and make that all the way over. If I drag that here now, you see that it is a very solid line. And that flow at 100% means that it just went and just layered it down like paint. Now if I go and I adjust my flow to 50%, somewhere around there, you don't need to be exact, and I do that same thing, you can see it's a lot more translucent, and I can kind of scrub over a little bit. And if I want a little bit more density in one area versus the other, I can do so by scrubbing harder in that other area. Now what density does is it limits the amount of that paint that can actually hit the page. So if I go to density at 50%, same thing roughly, no matter what my flow is set to, the most that it can put down is 50%. So density is kind of how much of that paint can hit the page. Flow is at the time how much is going down. So if I don't want it to be too much effect, I might lower my density so it can't get too much. And then if I want to be able to go in and subtly add a little more light to one area or take away a little more light from another, I can adjust that flow rate to be able to do that. Now I don't want any of those there, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete mask 3. That's going to get rid of all 3 of those brush masks, and we're going to start a different brush mask now. Go back here and do one like we'd actually want. Now I want a little more blending. So for that example, I turned the feather down, and that's where our blending is. As I move this up, you'll start to see that one circle that we had, the actual filter brush, start to get a second circle around it, and that's our blended area. Now if I keep going and increasing that, you see that that's a larger area. There's more of that feathering or that blending. This is going to depend on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to paint within the lines of one of these houses, I'd turn that feathering off entirely, because now you can control hitting exactly the roof line and the edge of the siding and everything else. Here, with that feathering up, my flow down, my density limited, I'm going to go with a little bigger brush in here, and I'm going to draw the eye just into these buildings by giving them a little bit more brightness. So let's bring the exposure up just a hair. And I'm going to go ahead and just paint in a little bit here. And remember, my flow is down, so it's not going to have a big effect right off the bat. You might not see much of this, but the more I scrub on one little area versus the other, the more it's going to kind of come through. So if I do now a little before and after, same thing, it's ever so subtle, but your eye pops a little bit more to the center houses now. Same thing, I might want to do that down here to the surf coming in. That's going to draw your eye a bit more to these green colors and these tones. Now if I go a little bit more down here, I'm still limited by that density. I might need a little bit more. I can always add another brush. And this is an entirely new set of parameters. I can make it the same kind of flow and density. I can make it the same for exposure or anything else. But now it's an individual adjustment. So I'm going to go over a little more down here. Bring a little more of that out. Let's bring the shadows up a little down there. I want a little bit more blacks, but then those whites are going to make those white caps stand out. Now remember, I can go and I can individually look at these too. So if I go to mask 4, that's the current one for that foreground. I can see that's without it, and that's with it. I'm really making sure this looks natural. I don't want there to be this very easy to see line, and I want this to have it look where the viewer sees this and their subconscious is what's picking it up, not them going, oh, they've brightened this right there. That little trail is now drawing your eye across that surf, down that rock line, through those homes, up that darker fjord, that one shooting out behind them, to the brighter part, and then that graduated filter, that linear grad that we put on there, is helping now shape that light back down in a circular manner. That's what we want. We want to keep the viewer engaged in your photo. We've all heard of leading lines. We want triangles or we want circles, moving the eye within the shot. Otherwise, that leading line can lead them right off the page. And if it's on a wall, like a gallery, you just led them to the next person's shot. You want to keep them focused and moving around with your shot. Now, I like this a lot. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's see what it looks like if I was to take all of those masks away. So we're going to go back to masks, go and click. That was our shot from the other day, and that looked pretty good in the last episode. But now, all of those masks are really helping create that subtlety. This is not cheating when it comes to photography. Ansel Adams did this, but he was doing it in a dark room just by shaping the light, using his hands to block certain areas to make where the light hits a little darker in one spot, or making less light hit another area to brighten that spot, just like we did to the houses and to the foreground here. So this is the same kind of burning and dodging you would have done in the dark room back in the day. So don't feel guilty about this. You're really just creating the image and the way that your mind's eye saw this, and you're trying to represent that's the viewer. There is a lot more when it comes to masks. We're going to get into a little bit more deeper in the next episode. So make sure to subscribe because you're not going to want to miss that one. But as for today in the Lightroom Whisperer, that's about it. Thanks for joining me and keep on Lightrooming.